our moderator, Srinivasan Viswanathan, Srini as we know him. He's the CEO of Vibrant Energy Holdings in Singapore. It's a great company that does a lot of work with corporates in India in supplying them renewable energy. So please welcome Srini, who will then introduce his panel to us.
Good morning. This has been a really fascinating discussion since morning, and it's really an honor and privilege to be here with an opportunity to moderate such a elite panel. We're going to be covering this topic on investing in a green future and aligning corporate strategies, and it's very, very pertinent because if you actually think of the problems we discussed all morning, the industrial activity contributes for more than 21% of the global greenhouse gas emissions. And that's another area, while we talk of all the areas that we need to have urgent action, the industrial decarbonization space is absolutely critical. And we are seeing a resounding change in the way industries and corporates are thinking about their sustainability footprint. What used to be generally a CSR activity, generally a voluntary activity, just to kind of make them look good, has now become a very strong call to action. The RE100 initiative, for example, the companies that committed that they would be 100% renewable, which was about only 30, 40 companies about a decade ago. Today, we have almost 450 companies that have signed to be 100% renewable and different time points. That's really a tall target. I work in India with corporates, and I'm very humbled to see that many of our corporate customers, many of the other corporates who today are very serious about net zero, we are seeing hard-to-abate sectors like steel, cement, fertilizer. All of them were doing round-the-clock, trying to figure out a way to deliver round-the-clock renewables, decarbonize supply chains, figuring out how to bring in green hydrogen, green ammonia, and the actions that we are seeing on the ground is really encouraging. But having said that, I don't think it's still a lot more to go because the time to act, as we say, is really, really short. What I have is a very prestigious panel here. Let me introduce the panel. As I call in, I would request you to come in and step on the stage. What we have, to start off with, let me introduce Rishi Kapoor, who is the co-CEO of Investcorp. Let's give a round of applause. Followed by Mr. Ramaswamy. Please come onto stage. He heads the global. He's a global head, Center for Carbon Transition with JP Morgan. Let me now invite Mr. Mohamed. Althaf, yeah. Mohamed is a director with the LuLu Group. But last but not the least, Ms. Annapurna from the Nature Conservancy. Thank you very much. So to kick off the session, I would request, I would like them to talk a little bit about, spend a minute or two introducing themselves and talk about how they're going, what are the key activities they're working on, and some opening remarks in terms of the subject that we're talking about in terms of corporate strategy to kind of help to decarbonize and the role climate finance plays in it. Can I, Ms. Annapurna, can I start with you?
Yeah, thank you, Srini. Clearly, just let me give you a little bit of an introduction to where I am from. The Nature Conservancy is one of the largest conservation organization in the world, and as we say, perhaps the least known, because since 1951, the Nature Conservancy has been working for saving the planet as it would be. So it is spread in about 79 countries. And I work for TNC India, which was one of the most recent business units that was set up by the Nature Conservancy. And this was as early as 2017. So clearly, I would like to have, I just wanted to mention that I am the odd one out here. Primarily a lady, so giving a gender balance here. The second one is that I am not from the corporate sector, but definitely not a watchdog, but a supporter of the work that the corporate sector does. So going forward, maybe I would share more details, but this is just an introduction.
Thank you. So I'm Rishi Kapoor, not the one that you were perhaps expecting to see. He's much better at the singing and dancing routine. God bless his soul. But I'm co-CEO of Investcorp. Investcorp itself, as many of you might know already, is a true child of the Gulf. We originate from the region. We started operations a little over 40 years ago. But from that launch pad over here, it's become a truly global organization. We manage about 50 billion in total assets today, all invested in private markets, which includes private equity, private real estate, private credit, infrastructure, and affiliated strategies. And a geographic arc that covers most of the markets that are relevant to our kind of business, from North America to Europe to Middle East, India, of course, and the rest of Asia. We are about 500 people today. Obviously, I think when it comes to sustainability in general, but climate particularly, Investcorp has a role to play on multiple fronts, not just as a member of the broader industrial ecosystem, but also as an owner of many, many, many assets and companies across the globe, as well as a provider, as an intermediary, as a channel for much needed capital finance, climate finance. So I hope we'll get into that discussion a little bit more in detail, but good to be here.
Thank you, Rishi. So my name is Variankaval. I work at JP Morgan. JP Morgan is a global bank, $4 trillion balance sheet, about 300,000 employees around the globe. And I've been at JP Morgan my entire career, about 21 years at this point. I run a few different businesses. The most relevant for this is what we established about 3 years back. We call it the Center for Carbon Transition, or CCT for short. Have a dual mandate for the CCT. One is to design and implement the JP Morgan strategy around climate as it pertains to all our client-facing activities, whether it's in investment banking, commercial banking, et cetera. And the other one is to essentially work with our clients on what they are doing around the theme of decarbonization, kind of narrowly speaking, but on the broader climate and on the broader sustainability questions, which clearly is top of mind for, I would say, every client in every sector around the globe. So I have about 125 bankers who are focused on this topic around the globe. So, very briefly, we have a bunch of things going on at JP Morgan. We think of ourselves as a leader when it comes to this topic. The couple pillars that we have, one is we were the first large bank going back in 2020 to announce that we are going to take our, essentially our wholesale balance sheet, and then what we then call Paris Align it, essentially measure the carbon footprint of all the clients that we finance, and then put a target on that carbon intensity over a course of time. We had 2030 intermediate targets. So we have done that work now for 8 industrial sectors, and I can talk more about that. And we have also started publishing progress on how we are doing against these targets that we initially put on ourselves. So that's pillar one. The other big pillar is we have a $2.5 trillion commitment to the Sustainable Development Goals. Of the $2.5 trillion, $1 trillion is essentially focused on climate or green initiatives. So this is all kinds of things we can either finance or facilitate for the kind of broader global economy. Again, that's a target over the course of the decade. And that's again something that we publish annual progress on. We are making about roughly linear progress. Over the last 2 years, we have done about $180 billion worth of what we call green financing. So those are kind of two very specific targets that provides JP Morgan a little bit of, we use it as guideposts for designing how we interact with our clients, how we interact with the capital markets on this broader topic. So again, very, very happy to be here.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Mohamed Althaf, and I think of all the panelists, I have the least glamorous job title. I'm a grocer, so I run supermarkets in the region. So a lot of people do not associate LuLu or supermarkets with COP28, but just let you know that we are also under tremendous commercial pressure now. Just like you have countries and communities threatened by the climate challenge, our industry is also under tremendous pressure now. Our supply chains are disrupted. We have inflationary pressure. All the events that's happening around the world is impacting us now. I think I met some of you in the last G20 in Delhi. Between then and now, we are going through an extraordinary geopolitical tension on one hand. At the same time, we have extreme weather events happening everywhere, including the native city of MR in Chennai is now seeing floods. All this is impacting our industry. Our margins are shrinking, so we are taking it very seriously. I represent our LuLu in the board of Alama Kada Foundation on Circularity, also in International Chamber. I sit as a member in New Plastic Economy. And within the last 3-4 years, our focus has been to go net neutral, and I think we have achieved some milestones. We have arguably the first net neutral supermarket in the region, in Qatar. Looking forward for more discussions on this. Thank you.
Yeah, so thank you. The way I'm looking to structure the conversation today is, for the first part, we'll talk about how do we get more corporates thinking about decarbonization? How do we bring more corporates into the fold? Obviously, Mr. Mohamed, you have already initiated some of these initiatives at LuLu Group. And I'll take views from the panel, and then we'll straight jump into climate finance and how that can support this initiative that corporates would be able to achieve their goals. So if I may address to you, Mr. Mohamed, can you talk a little bit about your experience bringing the whole sustainability piece within your organization, and are there learnings that you can share to make sure corporates who have not yet embarked on this domain can start thinking about how to get there?
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Just like all other industries here in the region, our regulatory framework evolved much later, and quite honestly, we didn't have much of an investor pressure on companies to go that direction. So just like everyone else, we did all the fashionable things. We had plastic. We used to have once in a year. We used to have Earth Day. We used to eliminate plastics, all that. But in the last 3 years now, we see this pressure a lot. And now that we understand that this cannot be an ESG job, we had a department that was created for ESG. But now that we know that this is posing direct challenge to our operation and our business model, this has become our board agenda now. It is a part of our board thinking now. In the beginning, when I had the opportunity to lead this initiative, I thought first thing that we need to do is to stop calling it an ESG or corporate social responsibility initiative. We need to convince our finance department. I have many bankers here on my panel, and it's very hard to convince them unless you come up with the figures. So to start with, we worked on the efficiencies first, and we thought, we have 280 stores across the world, and we are consuming a lot of energy. The first initiative was in terms of energy efficiency. We had to retrofit a lot of our buildings. We had to incorporate IoT into our systems, and that required a huge amount of capital investment. Once this was convinced, our board was convinced about it, we implemented our strategy into making all our stores to energy efficient stores. Second was decarbonizing our supply chain. We are operating in a region where 80% of the food has to be imported from somewhere in the world. That results in a lot of what we call food miles. So we started working with our supply chains outside, US, India, UK, and try to work with our stakeholders to decarbonize our supply chain. That was the second initiative. Then it also helped that new financial instruments that came into the market, new reporting standards. We are, as a company, we are going through a lot of reforms. We have a sovereign fund invested into our company. So that all brought a lot of environmental discipline into our store. And today, we always see the positive side of this transition. UAE government and Oman has made it, has banned use of single-use plastic bags. That campaigned gain to the industry. I'm not talking only about LuLu, but all the retailers here is close to $100 million last year. So there is a lot of money to make by sensible green transition. This is what we keep telling people. Food wastage was another thing. So we are implementing a lot of scientific solutions to this now. This is resulting in huge reduction in our food wastage, also improving our bottom lines, good practices, energy efficiency, and then a lot of other practices that we are incorporating. It is a lot of positive development is happening in our industry. And there is also a lot of collaboration. We are using better data management for all these processes. So I think, so today we used to say that 5 years ago, every industry is a digital industry. They're all, whether you are a retailer or any other business, you have to incorporate your digital strategy. Today, every industry has to become sustainable. So that way, I think even a very ordinary, very boring business like retail, food retail, now we are talking about textile circularity in UAE. That is another development on the next stage. So a lot of positive things are happening here. And then all LuLu hypermarkets today has got refill stations now. And just by listening to young people who came to the panel before, I was just wondering, maybe my generation is an aberration. A generation before me, my father's generation used to believe in refilling. They used to take their own plastic bags to the stores in India. And now I think the future generation is doing the same thing. So it is just an aberration. I think we will be able to correct it with all our efforts.
May I challenge Mohamed? I think the banking industry is the most boring industry, not the grocery industry. Just maybe quickly, if I may, right?
So I was just saying, even if corporates are not moving forward, what your big tagline is, you can still save millions of dollars by going sustainable, which is a big tagline, even if corporates are slow to move to this space. What I was going to direct a question to you, you talked a little bit before that you have been helping clients figure out their carbon footprint and help them to, can you talk a little bit about how that process went through and kind of the challenges you had getting corporates to accept that?
Yeah, look, I think again, I was amazed. I think what Mohamed you said is exactly what the journey JP Morgan went through. And our thought process could not be more aligned. Right? We have had a corporate sustainability department for well over a decade. We have had a ESG risk department for well over a decade. But only about 3-4 years back, we came to the realization that our business strategy and our sustainability strategy cannot be viewed as independent things. You had to merge the two because that's how the world was going. And we had to integrate the idea of sustainability into our go-to-market strategy. When our bankers go talk to their clients, we needed them to be armed with all the relevant facts when it came to the JP Morgan stance on climate, but also on the clients, right? Whether it's a grocery store or a steel company or an energy company. This is, again, you didn't use the term, but I will. It's a mega trend, right? Like digitization, to your point, was a mega trend. We were very focused on it. Obviously, AI keeps us focused on it. But this is absolutely the most important factor that is impacting the global economy. It is absolutely the most important factor that is driving capital mobilization in the world today, right? So all of these realizations we have arrived at over the last 3-4 years, our board is focused on it. Our CEO is exceptionally focused on it. So to us, it's easily the most interesting, perhaps the biggest opportunity to make money that we have seen in our lifetimes, right? So purely from a commercial perspective. To your question, Srini, the initial days were definitely challenging, right? We as a big bank, we definitely got a lot of questions from our clients, which typically were, well, you are the only bank who's asking us these questions. How come none of your peers care about this? Why is it that you care about this stuff? Why is it that I need to engage with you on this topic, et cetera, right? But again, that's 3 years back, 4 years back. At this moment, I don't think there is a sector that doesn't care about it. I mean, the easiest way I can be in front of a board, a client's board or a CEO is by saying I can talk about climate. And I'm never denied a meeting, right? And as bankers, that's what we want, right? Access to clients at the top level, so we can then, have engaging conversations, win mind share, again, eventually sell some product. So while it's been a journey for us, it's actually kind of, very much a journey that every sector, every company is on. And so sometimes we kind of take this quite, I think, cynical view that the corporate world doesn't want to transition, that they are, trying to stonewall this whole thing, and people who don't care about profits are the ones who are trying to take us there. I think that is completely misguided. And if, by the way, that was true, then we are not making a transition, right? The transition will only happen when profit-motivated individuals and corporates of the world get behind it, and I think they are, right? And again, to us, it's, as I said, it's the biggest opportunity of a lifetime.
Yeah, thank you. Moving to Rishi, maybe I can ask you, I mean, obviously being one of the largest PE investors in the region, can you talk a little bit about sustainability for your own organization, and also how you think about sustainability for your portfolio companies, because that might be a great playbook for all investors across the world.
Sure. So, we are big believers in one simple adage, which is, what doesn't get measured doesn't get done, right? So when we decided to embed, not just adopt or embrace, but actually embed the principles of sustainability and responsible investing into our core activities a few years back, this is not recent, we developed what at that point in time, at least to us, appeared to be a bit of a proprietary framework, right? And in that framework, we decided to focus on 3 dimensions: responsibility towards our role as an employer, responsibility towards our role as a citizen of the communities that we operate in, and responsibility towards our role, most importantly, as an operator, right? And within each of those 3 dimensions, we focused in turn on 4 or 5 areas. For each of those 4 or 5 areas, we came up with KPIs, and for each of those KPIs, we established measures that we would initially establish as a baseline to start with, and then monitor progress on those. Now, let's just take a step back over here and try and understand what I'm talking about, right? We, Investcorp, as the equity investor in most of the things that we do, we are at the bottom of the capital stack. We own all of the residual risk in most of the investment activity that we engage in, whether it is investing in companies all over the world, or investing in real estate assets or infrastructure projects, and so on. We are also participants in the private credit market, so that's a little different. But between our credit portfolio, our real estate portfolio, and our private equity portfolio alone, we own close to 50 million square feet of real estate. We own 70 companies all over the world, and we are invested in about 600 companies in our credit portfolio. Being an equity investor, the downside, of course, is you own, as I said, all of the residual risk. The upside is you have a lot of influence, if not outright control. So you can actually guide the journey of the assets that you own. So going back to what you were asking earlier, Srini, when we started on this, we said foundations first, right? So Investcorp, what is our own commitment to sustainability? But very specifically within sustainability, what is our own commitment to decarbonization, emission reduction? So we mapped out our journey in very clear, succinct terms. We said 2050 net zero, Investcorp as a corporate, using science-based targets. So no waffle, no ambiguity. It's very crystal clear what we need to do. Then on that foundation, we went to the next natural step, and we said, what about our portfolio? Now the portfolio becomes a little tricky, right? Because on one hand, we do have the ability to influence and control. On the other hand, we are transitory owners, right? We invest in a company, we own it, we create value, and then we look to monetize that value 4, 5, 6 years down the road. So as a transitory owner, what we felt was appropriate for us to do was to establish that initial baseline when we look to invest in a company and provide a clear path towards emissions reduction or net zero, as the case may be, for that company, along the way, monitor progress, and then, put them on that track, if you will, where it becomes a self-reinforcing cycle for them to continue on their journey, even if we are not the owners of that asset anymore. And that's how we've, looked at approaching the vast majority of our investment portfolio, working with the CEOs and the management teams of all of the companies that we own to map out their own very specific pathway towards emission reduction as well as towards sustainable value creation over a medium to long-term horizon using those 46 KPIs. What this doesn't cover, though, is what I call the capstone, of this whole process. And that capstone is not about policies and frameworks and KPIs, it's about capital, right? Capital in whichever format that is needed to finance and accelerate that decarbonization journey that we are all on. I'm happy to talk about it now, or if you want to come back, to that, we can do it then.
No, that's really inspiring, and I think you having started doing this years ago is really tantamount to the vision you talked about. Moving to Ms. Annapurna, you said you're the odd person out, but I think you're the most important person here because you're going to keep us grounded in terms of our initiatives. And apart from you obviously Nature Conservancy is one of the very, very inspiring organizations, but love to hear more about kind of to your touch. You work with corporates, you work with lenders a lot, big takeaways and guidance that you can provide to help in this corporate decarbonization.
Thank you. Thank you for the generous words for tea and the Nature Conservancy. But just to let everyone know, and you had touched upon it when we were speaking a little earlier, that the Nature Conservancy is disruptive in the sense that they have started thinking beyond. Even in 1951, if one was looking at what we need to do, and our mission is essentially to conserve the lands and water on which planet thrives. It's not just for people, it's also for the centipedes and the millipedes and the big mammals. So there is a need and there is a connect between biodiversity and the economy. There is no way that we could look at economics without looking at the biodiversity of the region and the planet. Clearly, the three colleagues that we have, eminent speakers here, come from very great organization with leadership qualities, but with deep pockets. If you were looking at the business sector, there would be about 30% who have the ability to drive leadership in this area. But my question would be how to go about with the other 70% who need to be pulled up, supported, shared experience and learnings to be shared. How do we get them to also look at those opportunities? Because those businesses are also using the ecosystem. Very clearly, ecosystem is something where we have soil, land, forest, biodiversity, water, everything that the business uses in some form or the other. The program today has been curated very well, and we had a speaker from the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. He mentioned about almost 180 business lead members, which means that the businesses, their products or activities touches the lives of every person on this planet on a daily basis or an early basis. If you would take those 180 companies, their products or their thoughts or their way of services, products and services, in some form or the other touch upon them. The reason would be that how do we move forward? So as I mentioned, I'm sticking to that DNC has been disruptive in its way, way of thinking. And one of the key things that we looked at is nature bonds. How do we bring about nature bonds in a manner where we are able to bring about the debt transfer of countries to ensure that the ecosystems survive? There are huge potentials, and we have JP Morgan, who has supported us here for one of the nature bonds that we are looking at, and they have come out with critical financial instruments that can help. So there are opportunities at scale with countries. However, what I would like to bring about is that it cannot be in isolation. There has to be an aggregation of efforts across corporates, across countries, and across civil societies. People also need to put in their, so this aggregation is an important component to make changes happen on the ground. There are lots of figures. I'm not giving it to them, but giving it to you. But clearly, we'll come back to it later.
No, thank you. That's great. So moving forward, I'm just slightly move the track to more around climate finance, and kind of trying to understand the capital requirements that will be required to deliver this mammoth target that we have. Mr. Althaf, Mohamed Althaf, can you talk a little bit about, from when you look at your business, the kind of investment that you think you will need over the next couple of years to hit your net zero target, and more so just for yourself, but also in general for you and your entire industry, the kind of challenges you think are coming out today?
Thank you. Just like I said in my previous comments, now that our industry understands that there is a lot of money to be made out of new environmentally friendly business practices, we also need a lot of upfront investments now. And these are these are all long-term capital requirements to change our process. A lot of this, our industry is actually quite old, as you know. So a lot of these buildings, our supply chain require a lot of money for decarbonizing. We need to find alternative energy sources now. Even in terms of things that we sell. I mean, so if you look at our food retail at least, this is a broad definition of ESG today. It is not only about carbon footprint, but even about protein sourcing. What kind of, what could be your carbohydrate source now? You know that in India, the Prime Minister Modi was quite rightly, and I think the imagination of the world is on the millet as another grain. So all over the world, people now realize that we need to kind of diversify our protein sources, our energy sources. All that will require a lot of upfront investments. Long-term patient capital is required there now. So I think, one of the way, I think, I have seen, at least not us, we have not yet done, but I know my immediate competition in the Middle East has actually come up with a green, kind of a green bond with all their chiller and cooler facilities, which is a trailblazer, I think. And even though they're a competition, we are looking at, so that way we will require money in terms of our constructions, decarbonizing our supply chain, changing our vehicle fleet, energy mix, a lot of other area of our operation. And I'm very pleased to note that bankers are actually willing to come and fund it more than any other capex investment today.
If I may ask a follow-up question there. So one of the initiatives that we are seeing globally is also to move the supply chain to green hydrogen, EV, green ammonia. Now, as of today, the costs are prohibitive, and we'll have to, in order to get the supply chain decarbonized, it will be very important that at the end of the food chain, which is where you are able to create that market for that kind of products coming in. You have any thoughts on that?
Definitely, and as I said, it is true of UAE and in the Gulf, but it's true of other regions. The food miles are actually quite extensive. A lot of people think that, countries like Brazil, India, or even Europe is very self-sufficient. But, even predominantly agricultural countries, only 30% of the food they eat actually are domestically produced. It has to come from somewhere. Either it's your fertilizer or your key ingredients. So this need to happen everywhere. And then energy has become expensive. So, for example, our own supply chain sources in US and UK has gone completely net neutral now. They sell energy now, they're positive. So similarly, we also need to make sure that, this is where biggest challenge for us now, because a lot of our emission is actually what they call scope 3. We do not produce anything, we do not manufacture anything, so there is nothing that much that we can do. We do not even decide customer preference or industry trends. We can only do this when it comes to our supply chain, decarbonization efforts, making our own stores net neutral buildings, and eliminate as much as possible. And a lot of work is actually happening. And as I said, we all have a financial incentive in doing this now, so people are very happy to adapt all those practices. The other thing is to keep a lot of our other productions close to homegrown ingredients, specifically on protein. So now you understand, we realize that there is a 300% growth in plant-based protein across Middle East stores. A country that is predominantly a meat eating, not for any cultural reasons, purely because of the awareness that young people have today that maybe switching to better protein alternatives is good for planet. So these are areas where we'll require a lot of money. As I said, also there are a lot of industries. We need to make sure that it is all data-driven. We need a lot of transparency in terms of visibility into their supply chain. So in all these areas, we'll require a lot more investments.
Thank you. Rama, I'm going to come to you last because you will have to tell us where you're going to get us the money after all of us ask for it. So maybe Rishi, if I may direct the question to you, in terms of when you look at the demand for climate finance and the sheer amount of capital that might be required over the next decade for all the companies that are pitching to be net zero and targeting to be net zero, where do you think from both, maybe you can talk it from an equity hat standpoint, and maybe if there is money to be made, is there something that will appeal to the equity investors, and maybe you can talk for the community of your...
Sure. Absolutely. It's not just something that is close to our heart, but it's actually close to our mind and wallet as well. I think that's where you're going. So let me start off by citing a few numbers first. I think the numbers being talked about at COP are $4.5 trillion of climate finance necessary per annum for the next decade, and we'll stop over there, right? So $4.5 trillion per annum. Now, I think it doesn't require rocket science to figure out that a bulk of that $4.5 trillion is actually going to get directed towards the very large scale, large capex heavy infrastructure-like projects, renewable energy, heavy industry, and so on and so forth. So that's fine. That's a fair bit of that is getting mobilized already. The flip side of this, and I think before I describe the flip side, is let me just lay out what the ecosystem looks like. If we are going to be successful in navigating this journey to net zero, it's going to require a bit of a virtuous feedback loop, if not outright connectivity, between 5 key distinct communities of stakeholders. Starts with policy, government, regulator, whatever you want to call it. Industry, I think referenced the fact that industry has a very important role to play. We can think of it as the corporate sector, right? The innovators, the ones who are actually coming up with the new products, services, technologies that are going to facilitate that transition. The capital providers, us, some of us, and everyone in this room, and the consumer, right? And I deliberately held back, mentioning the consumer earlier, because the beauty is that every one of the other 4 communities is also a consumer, right? The consumer is the foundation, Now, what is the consumer looking at? No consumer is going to be particularly happy reconciling themselves to an outcome where their quality and cost of consumption is materially affected in an adverse manner, right? It's just not human nature to accept that, right? So the reason why I bring it out is because if we are going to succeed in this transition, we have to accept that the consumer wants continued access to the goods, the services, the consumption patterns that they are currently enjoying at similar, if not better levels of quality, at similar, if not more affordable prices. And that's the role of the innovators, the policymakers, the corporates, and the capital allocators to lean in behind that transition with the flow of innovation and capital supported by policy tailwinds such that the unit economics, the unit cost of those low carbon, less carbon, zero carbon alternatives to current consumption patterns are at affordable levels, right? And that is even more acutely applicable for the global south, right? India is ground zero for that. India, I think everyone recognizes, is one of the most value-conscious consumption economies, right? For us to approach that $1.4 billion person population with a value proposition that is anything other than, hey, here is a low carbon, low emission alternative, and it is at a similar or better price point than what you are currently having to pay, is the only way to get them there. So now, the role of innovation in that is to come up with those alternatives, right? Well, the good news is that 60 to 70% of, I think somebody actually mentioned this number earlier, 60 to 70% of the innovation that is necessary has already happened. It's done. It's out of the lab, right? The even better news is just last year, there was $70 billion of venture capital investment into new climate technologies, right? Companies that have effectively taken that innovation out of the lab and are looking to prove them commercially. $70 billion. I think people are familiar with the fact that if there is $1 of VC investment, 2 to 3 years later, there's an expectation that there's going to be the need for another $3 of growth capital investment to lean in behind those companies with commercially proven technologies that can now start scaling up. So what does that mean? In 3 years, we can expect $200 billion of growth capital. And that cycles through, right? So $200 billion of growth capital is going to be necessary to help the companies that have come out of the lab, have proven their technologies to be commercially viable, and are operating at economics that generate genuine value for not just consumers, but for their investors. That's the space where equity capital from providers like Investcorp becomes most impactful. Not the $4.5 trillion, but that 200 billion pie in the middle. Because that 200 billion is where you can invest behind new companies, new businesses, help them grow exponentially, accelerate the adoption of their products, and bring costs down. And we've launched a new fund targeting investments specifically in that space. We announced it a few days back, in fact, and I think it's identical to the narrative that is coming out of COP. I think people have heard about the $30 billion Altera fund. Yeah. If you read the subtext behind that, it's exactly the same positioning.
Thank you. I think I just got a message. We are running out of time, but I will, Ms. Annapurna, if you can quickly help us guide in terms of one of the success projects that you talked about earlier in Mongolia, where you partnered with a private finance.
Yeah, I just wanted to give you the numbers quickly, very quickly, is that the Nature West, which is, as I said, a disruptive system that we have brought about in a non-government organization, which is an impact investing system, where you've got corporates, private investment capital to scale critical conservation work very clearly. And in this, 1.3 billion has been committed as capital, which with the founding support of JP Morgan. But as far as Colombia is concerned, what we are working is project finance for permanence, which is what I said, that individuals working on their own actions may not work for a debt-ridden country. But in Mongolia, because of the debt is being moved into conservation practices so that they can reduce their debt, and in that manner, they are able to bring about changes in conservation. And here also, we are looking at more than 120 million hectares through the project finance, which is going to be looked at, and it is 600 million hectares in the 20 countries that we are looking at. But clearly what I wanted to bring here, as because we are running out of time, is there is a landmark report of the Nature Conservancy, the Paulson Institute, and the Atkin Center for Sustainability, where we are talking about $700 billion funding gap between what we need to protect nature every year and what we need to be spending. So clearly, businesses have to start looking at not the way they had been working, doing their businesses, but they have to have a more intrinsic approach. How do we look at the intrinsic approach? These are some of the disruptive areas. I just wanted to very quickly look at what we are doing in India, which is a success story, which Cummins as an organization has come forward, where we are creating a water fund in one of the regions, which is in Maharashtra, the Ghodh region in Maharashtra. The water is, of course, as he said, who are our stakeholders. So starting from the pristine indigenous communities which are living off the forest, to the agriculture community, to the business segment, and then the residential community, and of course the peri-urban area. So you've got these 5 areas. How do water as an economic service, as an ecosystem service, how do we use it? It is an ecosystem service given by nature to us. Why should one have more and one not the other? So we are providing some sort of a disruption here of payment of ecosystem services, which the corporate sector has the ability to be able to bring in new design and new thoughts and new ways of combating what we can do at this stage. So this is just a quick example of India.
Last but not the least, Rama, if I can hand it to you. So now, a couple of things, some key themes are right. One is obviously the sheer quantum of funding required. Obviously, a large part of this requirement is infrastructure, which has a lot of debt component to it. At least the announcement that came out recently from COP, it's not generally going to suffice the requirement in the market. So from your organization, obviously JP Morgan has been leading the project finance across the world. Can you throw some light as to the ecosystem of financing, multilaterals, pension funds, how we can bring this capital in to meet the targets?
Sure. Again, I don't think there is an easy answer. Otherwise, I don't think 80,000 people would descend here to talk about it. The $4.5, $5 trillion number everyone is talking about it's not capital that's all going to look alike, right? To Rishi's point, right? There's going to be flavors of capital, and the flavor of capital will depend on the type of project or type of technology, and also the region where it is being deployed, right? A nuclear fusion company requires a very different capital stack than a solar, project company, right? A project in India requires a very different capital stack than a project in the US. So it is a little bit of all of the above, really, right? There is this notion of, which is called the valley of death, and this journey that these companies are going through, right? From innovation all the way up to scale. You have seed capital, you have VC capital, there is growth equity, and then there is kind of infrastructure capital. Not every company, every technology finds that seamless, right? And so you need policymakers to step in. In the US, the Inflation Reduction Act and the infrastructure bill are playing a pretty crucial role in trying to solve for that, right? When companies and technologies need that extra help, it's still not enough, right? To the point you were making there, a lot of green alternatives, right, have a green premium. They cost more or have poorer quality. And that is just not going to be acceptable in the long run. Again, you talked about the alternate protein industry. The reality why the alternative protein industry hasn't taken off is I don't think anybody's been able to solve for quality and price. But in the EV market, it's taken off because, again, everybody likes driving a Tesla, right? So it's pretty simple, right? Consumers will say whatever makes optical sense in surveys. When it comes to spending their money, they're going to go for value everywhere. I don't think it's an Indian phenomenon anywhere in the world. So again, look, capital, lots of capital needed. Policy support is crucial. We need everybody from VCs all the way to large infrastructure funds to play. The challenge we have is, look, typically the nature of, evolution is you get innovation done in, in universities and national labs, and that they get kind of, slowly grow into the commercial arena. We don't have time for that. We are trying to compress that timeline and kind of trying to take stuff into commercial arena before perhaps they would be ready, and that's risky. So the risk capital is quite important to seek. The MDBs play a role, right? The multilateral development banks, especially in the global south, because on top of technology risk, when a bank like us has to go invest in the emerging market is one thing, but the frontier market, right, is quite different, where there is political risk, there is very high currency risk. It's tough for a regulated entity like us to kind of play that, and so we need the help of the MDBs to kind of take some of the most risky parts of the capital. So some form of collaboration, and oh, by the way, the most important part of all of this is incumbents in every sector, who are often vilified for no good reason, that, oh, you company X, you are the problem that we are trying to solve, so you step aside. Somehow we're going to recreate the whole entire global economy with just innovators and entrepreneurs. Not going to happen, right? So we need to bring the incumbents in every sector along the journey, right? They have the capital, right? They know how to go to market, and they are well banked, and capital providers know how to provide them capital, right? We know how to bank the big guys. We would love for them to transition rather than have to kind of, throw our existing list of clients and start all over again, right? So again, it's a pretty complicated problem, but I don't want to end on that note. I'm very, very optimistic, right? I think the energy, the enthusiasm, not just the financial capital that we've been talking about, the human capital being, deployed against this problem is, I can't see how we will fail as a race.
So one last quick survey, if just to kind of test it out in terms of industrial corporates making their target to be hitting net zero. What is your, if everyone can give 1% from 0 to 100%, what is your confidence level that they will hit the net zero targets? Starting from Mr. Mohamed Althaf, just give a percentage.
In our industry, I think, as I said, we have now scope 3 is our major concern. So it is coming actually. I mean, this will be surprising for many of, because of the climate emergency.
Give us just a percentage? Because
percentage-wise, I think by 20, I think it's
50,
we are about
70, 100.
No, I think I'll put it at 60 to be safe. On
60.
That,
Okay, Rama.
Look, I'll say 80, but I'll also say it doesn't matter as long as you're all trying. If you miss by a little bit, I don't think it matters.
So we are business services. I'm actually very confident business services will meet its 2030 target.
So 80?
More than 80, 90 plus.
Oh, very good.
Very confident.
I think unless the 70% who do not get an opportunity to move on, I would keep it as 50%.
Okay, I think we are in a 50-50 at the end. But so thank you very much. I appreciate you sharing all your frank. Thank you so much.